Hi everybody, I'm going to be talking to you guys about my technology integrated lesson plan that I did. I chose to do it over dihybrid crosses within the context of a heredity unit. And this will have come right after the students have learned about monohybrid crosses. So they will have a little bit of a background in the genetics and how to do Punnett squares, but this is going to be on a little bit bigger basis and have a couple more steps to include. So some of the steps that I have listed there, we're going to be teaching students how to FOIL. A lot of them will already know this from like algebra classes, but we're applying it to genetics, and so sometimes that takes a little bit longer for students to remember. And being able to apply that across disciplines is also sometimes a challenge for students. Again, they will be filling out Punnett squares. For the monohybrid crosses, there were only 4 different gamete combinations that students could create in their first generation offspring, but in the dihybrid crosses, the students can have up to 16 different combinations of genes, or 16 combinations of genes, not necessarily different, but students will need to be able to organize all of that into a larger Punnett square. And then the last thing that students will do is identify the phenotypic ratios that are produced in this cross. Again, they will be familiar with phenotypic ratios from the monohybrid crosses, but in those cases, they were only identifying the dominant ratio to the recessive ratio, and this one you'll have 2 different traits, and so that's 4 different combinations of traits that can be expressed. The students that I prepared this for was for my observation class this past semester, and so I was working primarily with sophomores, and the class was advanced biology. So the activities that I included in this and the technologies were to use a lot of inquiry-based learning. So I started and ended the lesson with an online lab, and really kind of just gave students the freedom to just see what happens when they cross different phenotypes. And also the simulation that I used doesn't always give you that perfect mathematical ratio, which I think is good because it reflects what happens in real life. Just because theoretically the percentages should come out to be, 50-50, that's not always the case. And so I like that about the lab that I picked. And so the lab, you can see there under what kinds of technologies. The lab was through Explore Learning, and this is an online lab resource, kind of similar to the VETS that we used in class, but unfortunately this one was one that you had to create a membership for, which allowed you to you could have 5 minutes of free time with the lab regardless of your status, but if you wanted to use it for longer, which I would want to in this class, you would have to create an account. And then the other technology that I used was Nearpod, and I primarily used this for the lecture part of it. There were some application problems at the end, also some process problem, practicing walking through the steps, and I kind of broke that down into some separate Nearpod questions, and so this kind of allowed for some ongoing check-in on how the students are grasping the information that's being taught. Back up there under the how will I teach, that second part there, I found that the think aloud process is really helpful. Just being able to say, this is my mental process for how I'm getting to this answer, and walking the students through this is how to be thinking, or at least giving them an example of the right mental processes to be using to get to the correct answer. Some of the research and rationale behind why I use these types of assignments and assessments and different tools. The first source that I used, that using computer simulations, that was one of the articles that we read, and I thought that the online simulations that I used just did a really good job of being realistic, but still being something that are supplemental to the lesson and not completely replacing it. It keeps it student-centered. They're able to explore on their own, and I don't have to tell them, do this, do this, do this. But it's another one of those things where you can identify the limitations. You can say, this is where it doesn't quite, go the way that real life does. And that allows us to really focus on the content. This is the big idea that we want you to be getting from this lab. And then that second resource that I have listed there was Educational Technologies. Again, another one of the resources that we read this semester. And I thought it just really gave me a good basis for what I can be basing my plans off of. It talked about a lot of different types of technology and how to be integrating it the best way possible. And it also mentioned distance learning, which this lesson plan was originally distance learning, and then I adapted it to more of an in-person type setting. But it, again, could easily be transformed back into a distance learning model, which we see a lot of today. And then that last resource was the National Educational Technology Standards. And this just really gave a very clear outline of these are the things that we expect students to be doing with their technology in the classroom. And so I thought that was a very good guideline to be able to go back to and go, okay, yes, I am lining up this lesson with the set standards already. And so that was my lesson plan. Thank you guys for listening.